Good evening. Let me begin by setting the scene carefully, because what we are talking about tonight is not an abstract debate, and it is not a hypothetical disagreement. It is a public exchange, rooted in specific words spoken, specific actions taken, and specific memories that still carry weight for the people involved. This begins with a remark made by former President Donald Trump. He was speaking in an interview with Fox News. The interview took place while he was in Davos. During that conversation, Trump questioned the role and commitment of NATO allies in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks. Specifically, he questioned their participation and reliability in Afghanistan. Those comments were broadcast publicly. They were not offhand remarks made privately. They were part of a televised interview, and those comments prompted a response. A response that came not from a politician currently holding office, not from a NATO spokesperson, but from Prince Harry. Prince Harry issued a strong public statement. It was direct, it was measured, and it was rooted in lived experience. Now, before we go any further, it matters to understand why Prince Harry's voice carries particular relevance here, without adding anything extra to that fact. Prince Harry served in the British military. He served in Afghanistan. He has spoken publicly, before this moment, about comrades he lost during that service. In his response to Trump's remarks, he referenced that service. He referenced those losses. He referenced the alliance itself. At the center of his response was Article 5. Article 5 is NATO's collective defense provision. It was invoked after the attacks of September 11, 2001. That invocation meant that NATO allies treated the attack on the United States as an attack on all. Prince Harry emphasized that fact. He emphasized that NATO allies did, in fact, respond. He emphasized that Allied forces deployed to Afghanistan, and he emphasized that those deployments came with real costs, human costs, lives lost, families changed. He did not speak in abstract terms. He spoke in terms of service and sacrifice, and he framed his response around the reality that Allied troops stood alongside American forces after 9/11. There was no embellishment in that framing. There was no rhetorical flourish that added new claims. It was a statement grounded in the historical invocation of Article 5 and in his personal military experience. At one point, the tone of his response settled into something quieter, something steadier, a moment that felt less like a rebuttal and more like a reminder, as if to say, "This is what happened." And in that moment, the words carried their own gravity. This is not theoretical, he seemed to be communicating, without ever saying so outright. One short line captured that emotional weight without introducing new information. We were there. It is a simple sentence, but it sits heavily in this context. Trump's comments, again, were made during that Fox News interview in Davos. They questioned whether NATO allies had fulfilled their obligations. Prince Harry's response did not introduce new data or new timelines. It pointed back to what already occurred. It pointed back to Article 5. It pointed back to Afghanistan. It pointed back to service members who did not return home. And it did so without attacking language, without speculation, without prediction, just a firm restating of record and experience. The exchange matters because of who is speaking on each side. A former U.S. president speaking on a global stage. A British royal and military veteran speaking from personal service. Neither voice exists in a vacuum. But tonight, we are only dealing with what was said and what was answered. Nothing more. No additional context, no extrapolation, just the facts as they unfolded. Trump questioned NATO allies' role after 9/11. Prince Harry responded by emphasizing that NATO invoked Article 5 and that Allied forces fought and died in Afghanistan. That is the core of this moment, and it sets up what comes next. Because once those words are out in the open, the meaning of service, alliance, and memory becomes part of the conversation, whether anyone intends it or not. And that is where we will continue. So let's continue carefully and slowly, because this part is about sequence and sequence matters. Donald Trump's remarks did not come in a vacuum. They came during a Fox News interview conducted while he was in Davos. In that interview, Trump questioned NATO allies' role and commitment following the September 11th attacks. He raised doubts about whether those allies fulfilled their obligations in Afghanistan. Those doubts were expressed plainly. They were not framed as historical analysis. They were not framed as a review of documented military deployments. They were framed as a challenge. And once those words were broadcast, they existed as part of the public record. Prince Harry's response came after that. It was issued as a statement. It did not attempt to reinterpret Trump's words. It addressed them directly. And it did so by pointing to one central fact. NATO invoked Article 5 after 9/11. That invocation has a specific meaning. It meant that NATO allies formally agreed that the attack on the United States was an attack on all member nations. Prince Harry emphasized that this invocation was not symbolic. It resulted in action. Those actions included the deployment of Allied troops to Afghanistan. Prince Harry stated that Allied forces fought there. He stated that they served alongside American troops. And he stated that many of them made sacrifices. Some of them did not return home. He referenced those losses, not as statistics, not as abstract numbers, but as people he served with, people he knew, people he lost. There is a tonal shift in his statement at that point. It becomes less about rebuttal and more about recognition. Recognition of what was done, recognition of who was there, recognition of the cost. At one moment, the language narrows emotionally into something almost spare. It mattered, he said in essence, without adding anything beyond the fact itself. And that restraint is important here, because his statement does not accuse, it does not speculate, it does not extend beyond what has already occurred. It stays anchored in the past as it actually unfolded. Prince Harry referenced his own military service in Afghanistan. That reference is not new information introduced for effect. It is part of his public record, and in this response, it functions as context. He was not speaking as an outside observer. He was speaking as someone who was present, someone who wore the uniform, someone who experienced the alliance not as a concept, but as a reality. Trump's comments questioned whether NATO allies were truly committed after 9/11. Prince Harry's response answered that question by pointing to Article 5 and to the presence of Allied troops in Afghanistan. There is no expansion beyond that, no mention of later developments, no evaluation of policy outcomes, no commentary on political motives, just a direct line drawn between what was said and what happened. This is where the structure of the exchange becomes clear. Trump raised doubt. Prince Harry responded with record and memory. And memory, in this case, is not sentimental. It is factual. It is grounded in service dates, deployments, and losses. The statement also underscores something subtle, that alliances are not only defined by agreements on paper, they are defined by who shows up. Prince Harry did not say that outright. He did not need to. By referencing Article 5 and the sacrifices made, the implication is already contained within the facts. Another brief line stands out in the cadence of his response, a line that feels almost like a pause taken aloud. We stood together. It is not an argument. It is not a conclusion. It is a statement of occurrence. And in the Rachel Maddow-style pacing of this moment, that matters. Because the power here comes from letting the facts speak in sequence. First, the attacks of September 11th. Then, the invocation of Article 5. Then, the deployment to Afghanistan. Then, the losses. Then, the response. No rearranging, no embellishment, just the order as it happened. Trump's interview in Davos is the starting point for this exchange. Prince Harry's statement is the reply. And between them lies a shared history that is not altered by how it is discussed later. This is not a debate about hypothetical commitments. It is about whether those commitments were acted upon. Prince Harry's statement asserts that they were, and he supports that assertion by referencing NATO's formal action, and the real-world consequences of that action. The tone remains controlled. There is no rhetorical escalation. There is no personal attack. The strength of the statement comes from its grounding, and that grounding is deliberate. It keeps the focus where it belongs, on the alliance, on the service, on the losses. At one point, the emotional resonance is unmistakable, but still contained. It's not something you forget, he conveys, without saying more than necessary. And that line, too, does not add information. It simply acknowledges memory. The exchange ends, at least for this phase, with both positions clearly stated. Trump questioned NATO allies' role. Prince Harry affirmed that role by pointing to Article 5 and the sacrifices made in Afghanistan. Nothing is left ambiguous about what each person said. Nothing is left implied beyond the facts already on record. And that brings us to the final turn. Because once the facts are laid out this way, the question is no longer about what was said. It becomes about what remains, what stays, what does not fade. And that is where we will go next. And so we arrive at the end of this exchange, not with escalation, not with further commentary, but with resolution through restatement. Because what ultimately happens here is not a debate that grows louder. It is one that settles. Prince Harry's statement stands as the final word in this sequence, not because it silences anyone, but because it returns the focus to what already occurred. His response does not chase Trump's remarks forward. It pulls them back. Back to September 2001. Back to NATO's formal action. Back to Afghanistan. Back to service. Back to loss. And in doing so, it closes the loop. Trump's comments questioned whether NATO allies truly showed up after 9/11. Prince Harry answered by pointing to the alliance's invocation of Article 5 and the presence of allied forces on the ground. He did not broaden the scope. He did not narrow it selectively. He stayed within the frame of what was asked and what was done. There is a kind of discipline in that, and it matters. Because discipline is what keeps this from becoming something else. This is not a philosophical argument about alliances. It is not a political forecast. It is not an emotional appeal detached from facts. It is a reminder anchored in record. Prince Harry referenced his own military service again, implicitly, by grounding his words in personal experience without dramatizing it. He referenced comrades lost. He did not name them. He did not describe circumstances. He did not turn them into symbols. He acknowledged them, and then he stopped. That restraint is part of the message. At one point, the cadence slows, almost as if he is choosing each word with care. These were real people, the tone suggests, without ever stepping beyond what is already known. And that matters because it reinforces the factual core. NATO allies did deploy. They did fight. They did suffer casualties. Those are not interpretive statements. They are historical ones. Trump's remarks, made in that Fox News interview in Davos, raised a question about commitment. Prince Harry's response answers that question by pointing backward, not forward. Backward to Article 5. Backward to Afghanistan. Backward to shared service. There is no call to action in his statement. No demand, no request, no ultimatum. It is declarative. And in that sense, it is complete. One short, emotionally resonant line lands near the end of the statement, and it feels intentional, almost like a quiet full stop. We answered the call. Again, it adds nothing new. It does not need to. It simply reaffirms what the record already shows. And that is how this ends. Not with competing claims piling up, but with one claim answered by fact. Trump questioned NATO allies' role. Prince Harry affirmed that role by citing NATO's collective defense action and the sacrifices made by allied forces. Nothing beyond that is introduced. Nothing beyond that is required. In the end, the exchange leaves us with clarity. We know where the question came from. We know how it was answered. We know what facts were invoked. And we know what experiences were referenced. There is no unresolved thread here. No loose end. No open speculation. The alliance invoked Article 5. Allied forces went to Afghanistan. Prince Harry served there. He lost comrades. And he spoke up when that record was questioned. That is the full arc. And that is where it closes.